So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar, which is going to focus on the Pathways route into ICAEW membership. So just as a brief introduction, my name is Doug Withington. I am head of the international office at ICAEW, and as part of that, I look after the Pathways route, which is a global route into ICAEW. So we'll spend most of the session just walking through the PowerPoint, explaining the process to you, and how you can go about after today, if you're interested, embarking on this journey to become a member of ICAEW via Pathways. As we've already mentioned, please feel free to use the Q&A. I'm sure we'll address most of the questions as we go through the PowerPoint, but if I see any that we haven't, I'll pick those up, and my colleague Yoni, who works in my team, is going to also kindly, I think, answer any questions as we go. So let's get the PowerPoint going. So I don't want to obviously tell you a lot about what you already know, but you'll be fully aware, of course, who ICAEW is and our partnership with CIPFA. So but it's just useful to recap on our presence. So we're just over 200,000 members and students globally. So we have about 30,000 of our members sitting outside the UK. The rest of them are UK based. I don't know if there's anyone on the call today who's not in the UK, but that's about 20% of our members who are outside. We've got at ICAEW, should you join us as a member, we do supporting those members overseas. In particular, we've got the 10 offices outside the UK. We've obviously, as you'll know, got our HQ at Chartered Accountants Hall, where our colleagues at CIPFA are also based, and we also have staff in Milton Keynes as well, so we have an office there. So just a bit of background. It won't surprise you to know that a lot of our members, of course, as the same for CIPFA members, but are in senior positions in various organisations. So well represented. Our members are well represented. So anyway, moving on, we want to focus today, of course, on Pathways. That's the reason we're all here. And I would just give you the basic eligibility, essentially, which is I'm aware that there are two routes in for CIPFA members, of course, today, and the area I focus on is Pathways. So that's CIPFA members with more than 5 years of membership. Okay, if that's the case, then this is the route in for you. You don't have to sit any invigilated exams, which I'll explain a little bit later on. And this is how you would enter it. You will, if you meet that criteria of a member more than 5 years, you will have an opportunity to make a submission for Pathways, as we call it, and you'll hear me refer to that a lot. A submission for Pathways is basically where you take your documents which are required as part of your application, and you submit them through the ICAEW website. Now, you can't do this at any point in the year. Okay, this is important. It's not open-ended in that sense, but we have 3 defined submission windows each year, where you can take the documents that make the submission, you log into the website, you upload them, and that is making a submission, okay? So the windows are good in the sense that it gives you something to aim towards. Obviously, like many things, if it's open-ended and you can do it at any time, people don't, find it more focused, if you like, when they have a window to aim at. And obviously, we structure our promotion and our support, etc., around those windows. So the windows are January, May, and September. So what that means is that those are the 10 days, roughly, the windows are open in those months. That's not where you're doing the work, okay? The work to do this process sits in advance of that. It's just in the window where you upload the documents, essentially. And I'll talk you through all of that as we go through the presentation. So we've just had a window which is closed, which is the submission window in September. So the next one is in January. So the good thing about that is we're well positioned today, if anyone's interested, to be working towards that January window, because essentially you do need a bit of time to work on your the exam element of this, which I'll come to a little bit later on, so that you're not rushed, so you can put in a well thought out, well constructed submission. Okay, so having certainly a couple of months as a minimum is a really good thing. Now, we do put this statement at the bottom, which is important. And this is in relation to obviously becoming an ICAEW member, that you won't gain the audit signing rights. Okay, so if we just take that in isolation, obviously because of the regulation from the FRC around audit, we need to ensure that members have sat the appropriate exams and done the appropriate work experience. And so that is why through Pathways, you don't gain those audit rights. So I don't want to sort of get too fixated with that point today, and we can pick up any questions if anyone's got them more specifically around that. But that is something which we definitely have to point out to you via this Pathways route. So why would you join? What we do say all the time is that people join via Pathways or join ICAEW at kind of this stage, if you like. So they've obviously not done the exams and training. You've obviously become members via, through SIPFA. So why would you become a member of ICAEW? Well, we can focus on that just to give you an idea of who is joining. So we normally have about 600 to 700 members a year joining through this route. Okay, so what that tells you, of course, is that we have other professional bodies where people join via Pathways. So it's obviously not just SIPFA members, but we do see that they are in a variety of roles. Because you must have been a member of SIPFA for 5 years, we tend to see more mid to senior level accounting and finance professionals who are joining through this route. So that's a bit of the profile. Now, we do, because of the nature of Pathways, we have people joining across all sectors. Okay, so the public sector, most definitely. We have a lot of our people coming in who work in business, in the large firms, small firms, medium-sized firms. I always say, you name any area or sector of accounting and finance, or any roles within accounting and finance, and we'll certainly have had a Pathways member from that area. So it's a really diverse route into ICAEW membership. Now, the other thing to say is it's diverse in terms of geography as well. So we have members coming in from 35 countries through the Pathways route. So that's really good sort of positive story. Why do they do it? Well, everyone has their own kind of personal reasons why they might want to become a member, and also we're very much of the case that when people do join, we like to learn from them why they've chosen to do Pathways. So obviously you gain that dual membership with just the single membership fee. So that's obviously a big benefit, and you can tap into, of course, different career opportunities across the private and public sector. We often have a lot of Pathways people who come in because they're relocating or changing job. They want to demonstrate that they're keeping their professional profile kind of active and engaged and enhancing their professional profile. So it's a big factor for people wanting to do Pathways. You can also tap into all the ICAEW support and resources, clearly, which will complement and sit very nicely alongside your the offering which you get from SIPFA as well. So that's really good. And of course, it'll open up, which I think is a really positive thing, a wealth of other networks. So I always say to people, if you join, you tend to have your own network from your, we call sort of home professional body, the one you did your exams and training with. But of course, if you join ICAEW, it opens up a huge other network. I mean, whether you're based in the UK in particular or overseas, we have, as I've said, a lot of members outside the UK, a lot of events we put on, a lot of, different resources, high quality, online and in-person events. So we want to make sure that you're certainly comfortable with joining as a member. We're not trying to twist anyone's arm to do this, but we hope that you see the value and the appeal in it. And actually, whilst we don't have a significant amount of time today, of course, to go through the member benefits, I would encourage you to go to the website and explore those member benefits in your own time, and you can pick up, I'm sure, many things that are going to be useful and of interest to you as well. So as I say, those different insights which you'll get, the technical and ethical helplines you can tap into, those member events I referred to, those networking opportunities, and the high quality, as I say, sessions which we put on, events we put on online, is something which I'm sure you'll find useful. So we've got our faculties and communities as well. That's a really well subscribed member benefit, both of those things. So our faculties are sort of aligned to the pillars of accounting and finance, in essence. So we've got one for audit, we've got one for corporate finance, we've got one for taxation, and we, of course, we employ professionals and experts within those faculties to ensure our members of those faculties are kept up to date with updates to regulations or legislation, knowledge sharing, offering expertise and insights, and producing holding sessions and events and that kind of thing. So I think you'll definitely find that of interest. And our communities number about 30, and you will, I'm sure, find more than one community which will be of interest to you joining. So actually on this next slide, might be a little bit too small to read the detail, but you can see these are the communities which we operate. They're a really wide-ranging. Some of them are where people are in their career. So there's one for our younger members, for example, but then there's more specifics about accountants working in the public sector. For example, you can see one there, accountants working in the manufacturing sector, the healthcare sector. So I'm sure that many dual members would find this of particular interest, and you can join those to enhance your knowledge, grow your network, and stay up to date with changes and updates within those areas of accounting and finance. So that's another example of some of the sort of the way it looks in terms of one of these. So the ICAEW corporate governance community, and you can see what you get, the benefits at a glance there. So newsletters tailored to that specific area, which is really important, and which give updates, learning, online learning materials, webinars, and so on, and those events and roundtables which we've referenced. So you can join several of those. They're free to join for the members, and start making use of that immediately. So that'll be, I think, very good. Okay, now, so let's look at the actual practicalities of how you join ICAEW via Pathway. So what's the process, essentially? What do you need to do if you have, if you're interested and you want to go away and get started on it, let's say, in the next couple of weeks? Well, in essence, there are 4 things you need to do in order to put in a submission for Pathways. And I always say that the first 3 of these are kind of administrative. They won't take you very long at all, and you can get those squared away and sort of ticked off pretty quickly, so that you can focus the bulk of your efforts on the examination element, and we call that the examination of experience. Okay, and I've got a slide for each of these, so we'll walk you through them, try and make it as clear as possible. And the first one of those is, of course, that you need to register as a candidate for Pathways. It's free to register. It doesn't commit you, but you must register to gain an account with ICAEW, so that when the time comes to make the submission in one of the 3 windows I talked about, you can log into your account and you'll be able to then access the Pathways submission portal, which can be completed only when the window is open. So if you try to go and do that before, you won't be able to. You've got to wait for it to go live. And we'll talk about when those windows are a bit later. Now, when you've got that registration, you'll get a sort of unique set of numbers, which will be your candidate number, sometimes call it a student number, and it will revert to your membership number when you come in as a member. Okay, so that's how that works. We've got a short guide we can always share with you if you're interested after the session on how to get registered. Take you 5 minutes. Now, the second thing is that you need to get a letter of good standing from CIPFA, or do you? So this is the thing. So we've got a slightly different arrangement with CIPFA compared to some of the other professional bodies. So what we do is, when you go through the submission process during that window, it would ask you to upload a letter of good standing from your professional body, from CIPFA. Okay, well, we've come to an agreement between the 2 bodies that all you have to do is just write a short statement instead of the letter, where you would basically say, I'm happy for CIPFA to share my membership details directly with ICAEW, and you just sign that on a bit of A4 paper, and you would upload that in lieu of the letter of good standing from CIPFA. Because what we can do, obviously, because of the agreement which we have between SIPFA and ICAEW, we have a carefully controlled, of course, process, which would then, if you write that statement, allow SIPFA to tell ICAEW that this member is in good standing, that you're in good standing, and there's no reason, of course, we wouldn't be able to admit you as a member of ours, okay? So that just basically says who you are, that you've been a member for more than 5 years, so we know you're eligible, that you're paid up, I guess, your membership with SIPFA, that you're CPD compliant, and you're basically in good standing, which I'm sure, of course, all of you are. So that's the process. You can just do that when you submit, so we don't need to worry about that one until submission time. The third thing, the third kind of administrative task is getting the support of a sponsor, okay? So the sponsor, who can they be? Well, they need to know you professionally. That's the first thing. And the other thing is that they need to be a qualified accountant. So if you can find someone who meets those two criteria, which I'm sure you can, likely a work colleague, I would imagine, then, and they agree to be your sponsor, you need to ask them, of course, and then they agree, then they're going to be, what are they going to have to do for you? Well, they're going to have to do a couple of things. Now, the first is that they would be required, your sponsor, if they're not SIPFA and they're not ICAEW, so for example, you might get an ACCA member to be your sponsor, they would have to get a letter of good standing from their professional body, and they would PDF that, they would send that to you, and then you would keep that document for when that submission window is open, okay? So that would be the first thing the sponsor would have to do if they were not SIPFA and not ICAEW. If they're SIPFA, I believe that they can just write the statement a similar fashion that you have, stating that they are happy as the sponsor to be have SIPFA check the membership status and share it with ICAEW. So in the same vein as we would with your own letter of good standing. And if they're an ICAEW member, they don't need to provide a letter of good standing. Okay. And the reason for that is because the sponsor also completes something called the sponsor form. And on that, they state who they are, their membership body, membership number, and that they're happy, they've read your submission for Pathways, and they're happy to sign off on it and be your sponsor. They complete that form, they PDF that, they send that to you, and that sits with you, okay, ready to upload as part of your submission in the submission window, okay? So that form would indicate clearly if the member is a SIPFA member who's sponsoring you, or if the sponsor is an ICAEW member, and that will then allow us to know whether they either don't need the letter of good standing, whether they can just sign that statement in the same fashion you have as a SIPFA member, or of course, if they're an ACCA, let's say, and then we would expect to see the letter of good standing. So I hope that's clear. I know there's a bit of kind of nuance there, but that's how it works for the sponsor. And that moves us on to the fourth area, okay, which is very much the main piece of work for the Pathways submission, okay? So the examination of experience, let's dispel a few myths or add a bit of clarity on what it is, okay? So it's non-invigilated, as I've said. You're not going to an exam hall and answering some questions, you know, in a timed environment, and you're trying to rack your brains, think back to when you did your qualification, and trying to remember things about, you know, different types of taxes or to do with, you know, standards or whatever it is. It's not that. Okay, so that's the good news. Now, what it is it is a series of 5 questions which you will need to answer. Okay, the questions are not a secret. They are on our website all year round, and there'll be the same questions people who did Pathways last year will have answered, and there'll be the same questions people who do Pathways next year will also answer. Now, why is that? Well, the questions are essentially not trying to learn who knows the most about a technical area of accounting and finance. Okay, we know you have all that knowledge anyway from when you're qualified with SIPFA. The questions are trying to determine whether you have certain skills or attributes by demonstrating you have those by using specific examples from your last 5 years of work experience. So each of the 5 questions is aligned to a skill or attribute we deem is important for our members to have. How you demonstrate you have that skill is by going back over the last 5 years and no further than 5 years, okay, and telling the examiner in the answer you write to the question about a specific situation from that time period where you demonstrated that skill or attribute, okay? And I'll come on to this a bit later and make it a bit clearer for you, but that's what this is about. This is about a reflective exercise and drawing upon your own experience, your own expertise, your own knowledge in order to demonstrate you have certain skills, okay? And we'll look at those questions in a moment. Now, the other thing to say is that the word count sounds a bit daunting. We advise around 4,500 words for the submission. Okay, so it's a bit like a mini dissertation, I suppose. Okay, that's what it really is, and it is very much a reflective, you know, looking back, picking the best examples, I suppose, from the last 5 years of where you've shown that skill. Because you've probably used that skill, displayed that skill many times, but you want to pick the best and strongest example so that can become your answer. Okay, so how does it work? Well, there is a template on the ICAEW website, okay, and that is the examination of experience template. Now, within that template, there are the 5 questions. Those 5 questions are what we would call part 1, okay? And there are the questions, and there's actually sort of, they're pre-populated in there, and there's spaces also in there where you can type your answers. That's part 1. Part 2 is where you need to complete a mini CV, or when I speak to our international audiences, a mini resume, so that you can show the examiners, not in a huge amount of detail, don't worry, this bit's quite easy, essentially the roles you've had in that last 5 years. Because if you think about it, you're drawing your examples from the last 5 years to answer the question. So you need to reference them across to the roles you had when you were answering, when you were writing that answer, okay? So that's part 1, and part 2 makes up the examination of experience document. It's really important you make use of the resources which we provide for those doing pathways. We've got quite a good wealth of resources which are going to be updated in the next few weeks as well, where we have sample scripts from previously successful candidates. We've got an examiner's guidance document, okay? We've got you know, a couple of videos which we can share with you, recorded Zoom videos where I walk through the examination questions in detail, and I go through how to approach them, how to kind of attack them, if you like, in a way where you're going to produce good answers which are well constructed and are going to, if you like, satisfy what the examiner is looking for when they mark your answers, okay? Because this is a marked exercise, okay, by our examiners who are ICAEW members. And I've already said a few times, you've got to pick from the last 5 years. Now, if you've had a break in the last 5 years, you know, people have children, or they go off and do a master's, or they were unemployed for a time period, that's fine. Of course, we're not going to penalize people for that. It would just mean that you probably need to get in touch with us and we can explain in detail, but you essentially add on the number of months or years which you can pull from the answers from to address the gap in the last 5 years. So, for example, if you'd gone and done a master's for 1 year in the last 5 years, you would then be able to go back 1 year further when you're answering the questions. So you'd actually be pulling from the last 6 years. Okay, so we can answer that on a case-by-case basis. So some key points to remember. There are 5 questions, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. For the 5 questions, we actually want you to give 9 separate, unrelated examples, each one roughly 500 words in length, to answer the questions. So, and I'll explain this in more detail in a moment, but you're going to essentially have 9 answers which are going to be marked, and there are 10 marks available for each of the 9 examples, so that takes us to 90. And there is another 5 marks available for good spelling, grammar, and business English, and another 5 marks available for doing that part 2. Do you remember the mini CV bit I talked about? Making sure that looks good and neat and tidy and all the rest of it. So it's out of 100, okay? And that is how the examiners would mark each of those examples as a standalone, isolated example. So what I mean by that is they're not sequential, the answers. You don't need to start 5 years ago and work up through the last 5 years. They shouldn't really be related, the answers, i.e. if I read any one of them, they could be in isolation. I could understand what's going on without references back to another answer. Okay, so I hope that's clear, but I'll elaborate on that as we go through. This is really crucial, actually, that all answers need to focus on your own experiences and be from your personal perspective. When the examiners mark your script, okay, and they mark these 9 examples, one thing that threads through all of them in terms of how they mark is that you need to be telling the answers from I did this, I did that, it was my work, it was me who addressed that issue, or whatever it is, okay? If you start deviating and saying, the team did this, my colleague Doug did this, you know, I got someone who works for me to do this, or, you know, this kind of language is going to not be good, and it's going to start dropping you marks. It's got to be about what you did. This is about you and your experience, and the examiners therefore mark that. They want to see that in the answers. And that leads me on nicely to, when you're constructing your answers, you need to think how an examiner will think, okay? And this is what one of my additional videos goes into more detail about. Because when the examiners are marking your 9 examples, they are going to be using a marking key, which will sit next to your script. And they are looking specifically in your answers to ensure that you have addressed the component parts of the question. What do I mean by this? I'll talk about it in a second in more detail. But essentially, they are looking for specific things which they need to ensure you have addressed in order for you to get high marks. And if you don't address those, you're going to start dropping marks quite quickly. Okay, so if you know the component parts and what they're marking for, then you'll be able to construct your answers and structure them in a way which they're going to score higher marks. Okay, and as I say, I'll walk you through a lot of this anyway, so it's no big secret. So let's have a think about the questions. Okay, today is not an exam session. This is obviously an introductory session, so I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail and kind of be, you know, overwhelmed about all the exam side of it. I do that, as I say, in this additional video, but which we can share with you. But let's have a look at the questions, because it's quite important just to understand what I said about each question being aligned to a skill that we want you to demonstrate using your experience. So the first question is about the skill of being able to identify business issues. Okay, so you need to talk to us about or narrate the story, if you like, in your answer about situations from the world of accounting and finance, no matter what field you work in, where you have identified issues. It could be conducting an audit and you've identified an issue. You could be working with you know, a client or a company, and there's an issue around high costs, you know, a certain area of the business, or, you know, lack of profitability, or whatever it may be. Okay, we need you to tell us about those situations as part of your answers. So that's the first skill. The second is the skill of analysis. Okay, so this is one that's integral to accounting and finance professionals. You'll, I'm sure, have many examples of where you have used your expertise or numerical techniques to analyze a business or professional situation. You could be working to analyze financial statements, for example, and you would tell us about the numerical techniques you've used in order to do that. Now, question 3 is about the application of professional judgment. Okay, again, another skill I'm sure you've got many examples of. So choosing between options, okay? So it could be that you're helping a client set up a company and you're looking at the different types of structures you may be able to use, and you look at the options and use your judgment to choose the best one. You may be looking, you know, with another client about using debt or equity to fund an acquisition. There's so many different examples you can use on this one, because it's about using judgment to choose between options or to prioritize things. Okay, that's 3 of the questions. Now, the next one is the one candidates tend to do the best on, actually, which is the question where the skill we're looking for is where you've given advice professionally. Okay, loads of examples. Okay, gone are the days where accounting and finance professionals wouldn't be necessarily the ones delivering the advice. They would more be doing the analysis. Now, of course, we've got, you know, candidates loving this question because it allows them to talk about the kind of situation where they're with a client and they're giving advice, or they're giving advice internally. So internally, it could be, you know, to your head of finance around something to do with budgeting or forecasting, or it could be to a client about a tax matter. You know, whatever it is, it just has to culminate in you giving professional advice. And the fifth question is the ethics question. So it's about demonstrating how you've dealt with an ethical issue and the behaviors you've shown while dealing with it. So this is normally drawn from the ICAEW Code of Ethics, where you would go for inspiration to think about situations where you've had to deal with confidentiality, okay, where you've had to deal with things like pressure to achieve a particular result, conflicts of interest, for example. So these are all the kinds of things you can draw upon to think about, yes, I've dealt with that ethical situation in the workplace, and I'm now going to narrate this story about how it unfolded and how I dealt with it, how I addressed it, and the behaviors I showed whilst doing so. Behaviors such as professionalism and integrity and so on. So I'm sure the eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted that we've actually got 5 questions, but as I said before, there are 9 examples in total, because if you think about questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, we want 2 separate, unrelated examples from you of where you've displayed that skill. And then question 5 is just 1 example of the ethical issue. So that gets us to 9 examples and 90 possible marks, okay? And then we have the other 10 marks, as I've already referred to. And it doesn't take a mathematician to work out and to see how I arrived at that guidance of about 4,500 words, because you have 9 examples. We guide around about 500 words, okay, to, around about 500 words per example times the 9 examples gets us to that 4,500 words. Okay, great. So I was a bit sidetracked there because I was just pulling up the Q&A. So I wanted to just pause for a moment, have a sip of water and answer a couple of questions. Okay, so we've got a member living in Vancouver, and I want to do the pathways to ICAEW. Being overseas, I don't have a UKCA to verify my Canadian work experience. Okay, does this mean I have to do the tax exam? No, so as I've said, so with the pathways route, well, first thing is that we are not, because of the code of ethics, which professionals obviously have to adhere to as part of being a member of CIPFA, and this answers, I think, a couple of the other questions. We're not looking to go to your employer, for example, to get verification on your work experience, or go to a UKCA because you're in Canada to verify your work experience, okay? Because you're obviously ethically bound as an accountant and a member of CIPFA, when you sign and submit, and when your sponsor signs off on your submission, that is obviously the statement that is enough to say everything you've written is clearly accurate and truthful. We don't phone your employer or check with your employer to say, did they do this thing, what they've said a year ago, and so on. So it just doesn't happen that way. So I think Yoni's maybe closing off the questions. I've done them. So yeah, having worked overseas for 15 years, how easy would it be for an examiner to know about my employers? So the same. So you just complete saying, this is where I work. And in your part 2 of the mini CV, you will say in the last 5 years where you've worked. Okay. And we take that. Okay. So we don't then go and, as I say 3 years ago, I'm going to go and check they were working where they were. Okay. So that's done. How do you verify the accuracy of what people write in their work? So again, it's the same point. You're bound by a code of ethics, and we take that as live. What's the pass mark? Yeah, that's a direct to the point question. It's fair enough. Thanks, Chris. So the pass mark, a clear pass mark, is 60 out of 100. Okay, so if you get 60, that can be comprised of any marks assigned, as in you could get 1 out of 10 for question 1.1, 1 for question 1.2, and then you might score really highly in the others and you get 65, you've passed. Okay, we do have this slight grey area, which is a little unusual, but it's where people who've got 55 to 59 could pass or could fail. Okay, so 60 is clear, you're passed regardless. 55 to 59, you pass, but you can only fail 1 question. to pass within those marks. If you fail 2 questions or more and you score in that range, you fail. Okay, so we often get people who get 2 people might get 58, 1 passes, 1 fails. Okay, now what's passing and failing per question? Well, questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are out of 20 if you think about it, because there's 10 for each example, you need to get 11 or more to pass that question. And question 5, it's 6 out of 10 to pass. So as I say, if you got 2 out of 20 for question 1, that you actually pass all the other questions and you get 58, you've passed, okay? But if you fail questions 1 and 2, and then get good marks and get 58, you fail 2 questions and you fail. I hope that's made it clear. It doesn't sometimes sound that way, but that's the way it goes. Okay, so I want to just spend the next 10 minutes going through one of the questions. As I say, it's not an exam session today, but I want to bring it to life for you so that you can really see how this thing works. So question 4, I said, is the one people do quite well in. It's pretty straightforward. The question is, using your recent work experience, describe 2 situations where you used your technical knowledge and or practical experience to develop or give advice. Okay, so you'll recall that I mentioned there is a skill assigned to each question, and we know here the skill is advice. That is ultimately what the examiners want you to tell them, that you've given really good, strong advice. So the answer, in essence, is building up to you delivering that advice, okay? And I mean that in a very practical sense, that if you have a 500 or 600 word answer, okay, it doesn't need to be exactly 500, remember, that's just a guide. 600 words would be fine as well. We would literally want to ensure that the end of the answer, so the last couple of 100 words, would be where you deliver the impactful advice, okay? So that's really critical. So that's what the crescendo is, kind of what we're building up to in our answer. Now, before we get to that, it's really crucial to remind you that I talked about component parts of the question, what makes up the question in essence. And then you ensure that you've addressed those component parts in your answer in order to score highly. That's how the marking is done. Now, the question is not put together in an arbitrary fashion, okay? It is actually carefully constructed using component parts. On the right-hand side of the screen, I'll use the cursor here, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 component parts in the bold text. Okay, the top one is not a component part, the one that says title, introduction, scene setting. That is just good practice for any answer you're going to give. i.e., when you type an answer of about 600 words, I would expect you to put a title at the top and to give a bit of an introduction and scene setting. So, for example, you would start the answer saying, I'll choose myself. Whilst I was working at ICAEW in the international department, I found myself in a situation where my managing director wanted advice on, how we were going to enter a new market. Okay, so you can see in that statement there, it's a paragraph in length. I've kind of set the scene of what's going on, who I am, the role I'm doing, and then I can go on to also in that scene say, which I just did, a mention of that I'll be giving advice later in the answer. So that's kind of quite a useful way to think about it. And that introduction and scene setting you need to do in every answer, because as I said before, each answer should read in isolation, i.e. I could pick it up, read it and understand it without having to read any of your other examples, okay? So that's just good practice, but it's not technically marked, okay? Now, then we get to the 4 component parts. Now, the component parts, I always say, are hidden within plain sight within the question. And I'll walk you through. The first one the examiners mark against is, have you demonstrated personal involvement, that you're at the center of the answer? Now, where's that? Using your recent work experience, describe 2 situations where you have used. So that's the reference to personal involvement. Talk about yourself, they're basically saying in the question. Now, the second one is, have you picked an appropriate situation from the world of accounting and finance? That's so broad, isn't it? This is how broad it is. Doesn't matter where you work. Have you found a situation where you're going to go on and give advice? Okay, so that's where you say, I was working in this job, doing this role, and I was going to be giving advice to the head of finance about the budgeting methods we were going to use for the forthcoming year. Okay. So that's a situation the examiners will say, yes, that's a situation in accounting finance where you would give advice. It's as simple as that. And that's just in there quite simply two situations, okay? That's what that refers to, that component part. The third one is, have you shown the technical knowledge and practical experience that is linked to you giving the advice? Okay, this is where there are linkages between the component parts. And we can see that reference there, your technical knowledge and practical experience, to develop the fourth component part, which is advice, giving the advice. So the two are intrinsically linked. Why can you give advice as an accountant? Well, because yes, you've got a professional qualification, but you've also told the examiner the technical knowledge and practical experience you have in that area that enables you to give advice people will heed. That's what's so crucial here, okay? So there are linkages with component parts. It should flow through the component parts, your answer. And I mean that in the literal sense that if you have a 600-word answer, let's say, I should be able to draw a line, 2 lines in the page, splitting it into thirds, okay? The first third should be your introduction, scene setting, and describing the appropriate situation. The middle third is where you deliver to the examiner your technical knowledge and practical experience relevant to and that allows you to give the advice. And the third part of the answer should be you giving that advice. Okay, so that's what I mean when you can split it and it should flow through that process. And I should be able to say there's about 200 words there covering that first bit, 200 in the middle, and about 200 giving the advice at the end. Okay, now the advice can be internal or external. We don't care about that. And most people fail because they're just not giving clear, concise, direct, and impactful advice. Giving someone a report or suggesting something to someone is not the same as giving clear and overt advice. So you've got to make sure that's there, okay? So I just wanted to bring that to life to you so you can see how questions are constructed and it's not, as I say, in an arbitrary fashion. And the translation of using your recent work experience, I haven't referenced that. The translation of that is basically pick your answer from the last 5 years, okay? So you can see everything is within the question there. And for question 4, if you think about it, you're going to give one example for 4.1, one for 4.2. So you're going to have, in fact, 2 500-word, roughly, okay, one could be 450, one could be 600, whatever, 2 roughly 500-word examples, giving you 1,000 words for question 4, okay? And they've got to be different examples of where you've given advice. Right, there's some questions are flying in, okay? Pass rate, I think. Oh, pass rate, I haven't said. Yeah, pass rate. So pass mark 60, we always say, is the clear one. Pass rate, every time we have a submission window, we have about 7 out of 10 pass. Okay, so about 70%. That goes up and down depending on a few factors, but generally speaking, that's who's passing. Okay. Do volunteer positions count towards recent work experience? Yes. So, for example, well, my own situation, I'm a governor at a school and I work on the finance committee and I could use that as work experience. That's absolutely fine. You just have to reference that as in the part 2 section. Okay, so it doesn't have to be paid work. Okay, it's just where you can give examples. So thank you for that question. Do examples have to be directly related to finance or accounting? Good question. And the broad answer is yes. Why I say that is that, I mean, accounting and finance, you know, there's many things you do within that. It could be operational related, some of it could be related to HR, but it always has to come back to the broad sort of sphere of accounting and finance. Why I say that is you could have a situation where you're making some HR references and decisions, giving advice, but you'd want to give the advice from an accounting and finance aspect rather than from an HR perspective. So if, for example, you were hiring, you know, or laying people off or whatever it is, you would want to focus probably on the accounting side of that. So, you know, budgeting for positions, you know, whatever it may be, not on the sort of, you know, I took someone aside and, you know, told them they got a job and this sort of thing. Do you see what I mean? I hope that makes sense. Okay. Must technical knowledge link to accounting and finance knowledge? Okay, yeah. So again, it's a similar point that I work in an industry where I have significant legislative knowledge, which is advice. Okay. Yeah, interesting. So we do have references to legislation and that can be used. You're an anonymous attendee, which is absolutely fine, but I'm more than happy if you're serious about doing pathways, you can reach out to me and I can give a little bit more flavor on that. But we do have references, of course, to you know, laws and acts and that kind of thing. It just happens that most of them do refer to accounting and finance in some perspective, but I'd happily explore that with you in more detail, perhaps offline. If you are a retired member, that's absolutely fine. I would, again, very much appreciate you reaching out if you're serious about doing this, and I can give you some advice on how to tackle the 5 years. You would be drawing from your recent work. So I suppose you could go back, let's say 10 years, and you would draw from those 5 years prior to that, okay, is how you tackle that. And as someone's already referenced, perhaps if you're doing anything else in the interim, potentially, you know, volunteer work or unpaid work, we can factor that in as well. So happily have that conversation offline as well. Yes, you can resubmit with the same script with improved answers if you fail marginally, absolutely. So if you're not successful, which not everyone can be, you get another 3 attempts at this. So we have 4 in total. Now we bank the questions which you passed. So let's say you passed questions 1 and 2. We bank those. You don't ever have to rewrite those ones. But the ones you failed, you get feedback and you rewrite them and resubmit them using the feedback. You can, of course, use entirely new examples, or you can rework the existing one you failed. Okay. Lastly, are you precious about format of part 2? Okay. I'm not precious about it, but the examiners do want it structured in a certain way. We do have a really useful guide. Again, Yoni could maybe put this in the chat potentially, where we are going to show you how to do a perfect part 2. Okay, I've sort of put one of those together for you. So if you are happy to get that link, we can perhaps share it. And I'm just still reading. More than one role, each 12-month section maybe, yeah, fine, okay. What you did in the sole 6 year responsibilities you outline in the CV. Yes, good point. So Daniel, you wouldn't reference in what you did. We don't want you to reference the particulars of the answer in that. So we don't want you in like 2022 to say, I don't know, whatever, you're a senior manager at, you know, Deloitte or whatever, okay? We don't want you to then say, oh, and I dealt with an ethical situation where, you know, I had a confidentiality matter, because that's what you've written about in question 5, but that's not the role you've been doing in that year. So it'd be more, you'd be saying, I don't know, working on the group accounts or whatever it is. Okay, so that's the purpose of that, but we can give you the guidance on the part 2 in more detail. What are the fees? I'm going to come to that. Is there a cost to submit? I'm going to come to that. Okay, so don't worry, we're not avoiding those questions, but they come at the end. Okay, so listen, let's just crack on. Now, I'm not expecting, don't worry, you to read this. It's not the point, okay? So this is the answer to question 4. We've only got a few more slides, so thanks very much for bearing with me. But I want to just kind of bring it to life again. So this is an answer that came in a few years ago. And I just want to say, you know, for question 4, bring to life what I talked about, how it should look. So the answer kind of looks good in the sense that it's about 500 words. It's nice paragraphs. I think the business English is pretty good. So just, you know, we don't want big blocks of text. We don't want loads of spelling mistakes, grammatical errors. Just it's obvious stuff, but we got to say that. So you got to please the examiner. Okay, you can imagine if you're marking a few of these, you don't want to come and it's just one big long block of text. Okay, so this looks quite good visually, so that's good. You'll be, of course, recalling the component parts I walked you through a moment for question 4. The first one is personal involvement. The examiner is literally going through your question and checking that it's from your perspective, through your eyes. How do they do that? Well, to put it bluntly, it's lots of I did this, I did that, it was me who did this, it was my idea, it was my work, etc. And we can see that. It's green because it's good. Okay, this answer is littered with the personal perspective. Okay, so they're going to get high marks on that first component part when the answer is being marked. So that's good. So they've done that well. And that component part is pervasive throughout the answer. Okay, so when I refer to sections of the answer to address component parts, the personal involvement one should be throughout the answer. Okay, so they've done that well. The second component part, an appropriate situation from the world of accounting and finance where you're going to be giving advice. And it should be in that first third. So look at that, it's nicely placed, isn't it? And they do, again, we don't need to read it verbatim. But, you know, I needed to advise the CFO, actually business English, not so good there, but I needed to advise the CFO about this, that, and something else. So we can see they've given us the intro, they've told us, set the scene, and they've told us they're going to be giving advice to someone later in the answer. So they get a tick for that. They would have been marked quite well on that. Why is the title orange or yellow? Because it's not very good, okay? Tell the examiner and be direct what the answer is about and link it to the skill we're looking for. SAO audit work tells me nothing. It tells me nothing that this is a question for answer. It tells me nothing it's about advice. I'd rather see something like, you know, situation where I was advising the CFO on X, Y, and Z. It's direct, it's to the point, it's the first thing the examiner sees, okay? The third component part, look at that nicely in the middle, isn't it? That's what I said, it should flow. That's the technical expertise, knowledge, and experience relevant to the advice you're going to give. So you can see here, it's not overly technical, okay? It's not necessarily what we're looking for, but there needs to be some references to, here you can see different types of tax. You've got, you know, sales tax, corporation tax, and so on. You've got AML matters, and so on. So there's enough in there for the examiner to say, yeah, this has got some technical stuff that's going to inform the advice that's coming. And the person who mentioned about, you know, legislation and that kind of thing, this is where you put that stuff, okay, in that middle bit before you give the advice. And then lastly, look how nicely that is, bang. Last third, the advice, delivering impactful advice, okay? Some of it's yellow because it's not advice. It's a wasted opportunity to give that advice. I want to see more of this. I was able to advise the CFO. I suggested a bit weak, but I was able to suggest appropriate wording. Okay, this yellow stuff is not good because it's a wasted chance. There's no advice within that. Okay, but it sits nicely where it should be. So this is a passing answer, 7 or 8 out of 10. Okay, and it gives you a flavor of how an answer, how you need to be thinking about constructing your answers aligned to the component parts. And as I say, if you're, you know, really into this stuff, and you want to do pathways, I've actually got 2 videos where I go through 2 90-minute videos where I go through each question and I tell you how to tackle the component parts. So we do give you a lot of support. Right, the dates and then the costs, and then we're a wrap and I'll answer any questions. Okay. Key dates. Now, we've talked about this in the frame of if you want to submit in January. Okay, if you're keen on this, there's no reason you can't. I know, you know, people have deadlines and there's, you know, tax deadlines and we're all very busy. But if you're keen to do it, you're well positioned now to submit in January. It's not so far that you're going to put it out of your mind, but it's not so close you need to get so stressed about, you know, doing it. So we're well positioned. No one ever tackles the examination experience in one go. You do it over a series of weekends or evenings or, you know, work time, however you're allowed to do it, or you can do it, construct it, and you would tackle each example probably, or each question. And I always advise people that the best way is you start with the question and you just get the sort of skeleton down of what you're going to answer. So you think back and you think, oh yeah, I remember I gave advice to a client. I run a practice and I gave advice to a client about some of their personal tax matters. That's a really good example. And I did it in July 2024. And so you start to write these notes down, and then obviously later you flesh it out, thinking about how you structure it with the component parts. That's how I would tackle it. So sorry, I digress a bit, but between the 6th and the 15th is when the website goes live to log in and submit your Pathways submission. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for. Preceding that, you need to register. I've told you about that. We do have a WhatsApp group. It's not some people's thing because it's quite active and it's, you know, it's quite a lot going on it. And because we get 400 or 500 people on it, you know, we do get some, we get a variety of quality in terms of the questions that are asked and comments and so on, but we try to keep it strict and to kind of rules and just focus on pathways. So if you do want to obviously get in on that, we're happy to share the link with you. It's quite useful when the submission is approaching because people are firing questions and we're trying to answer them, and it, you know, some of them might be relevant. When we say attend a new EOE session, I'd be more than happy with SIPFA should they wish me to do a bespoke examination session for members who are serious about pathways. We can set that up absolutely, and I can walk you through how to tackle the answers, or you watch one of my recorded videos I've referred to. And you need to get that sponsor support, okay, and sponsor form and so on. And that's got to be, any documents like that have to be dated 3 months back from the close of the window. So we ask for those to be dated, any letters or forms to be dated after the 15th of October, just FYI. Now, you have to wait 3 months for the results to come out, okay, because we've got to mark the scripts, our examiners who are our members, and we need to check all your documents. And so it takes 3 months and you get the results in April and you get an email saying you passed or failed. If you pass, you can come in as a member straight away. If you fail, you can resubmit, as we've already discussed. Okay. So now to the serious stuff, the money. Okay. So registration is free and it doesn't commit you. I told you that, okay, at the beginning. When you submit, you need to pay £345 in the window when you upload. It pushes you through a document upload and then you make that payment. Now, I always say to people, you can think of that like an exam fee, because in essence, we have to pay our examiners to mark the scripts, and you'll have a minimum of 2, sometimes 3 examiners marking your 4,500 word scripts. You know, you can see that that is a commitment there, and we must pay those examiners. And we have also the administrative costs of your submission. So we don't charge any tuition. We do all the support in-house, as I've said. There's no exemptions or credit fees or anything like that. That is your exam fee. That is your submission fee. You don't then pay anything till you come in as a member. Now, we have obviously an agreement where if you are renewing your SIPFA membership, and that is where you're paying your membership fee, you're not going to be paying us any membership fee. Okay, so that's the good news. We have had some emails back and forwards. I want to be completely honest about the admission fee, okay, which does stand at £600 if you're in the UK. That's a one-off admission fee, okay, and that is how it stands at the moment. I'm not suggesting that's going to change, but we do need to just get 100% clarity on that. So you'll forgive me for being slightly vague, but we're just going to get the exact answer that stands. That £600 admission fee if you're in the UK, 300 if you're outside the UK. I hope, Sophie, I've said the right thing there, but I think that's we need to just deliver that message. So great. So the other fees are, of course, relevant if you're practicing. So you will need to get a practicing certificate, and that is definitely in place because if you're engaging in practice, you're doing bookkeeping or whatever it is for clients, then you need to be getting a practicing certificate. Okay, so that's definitely in place. So those are the costs, and I'm going to end there. Thank you for your time. We're nearly at the end, actually. We timed that nicely. I just want to check the chat. I think that's just stuff Yoni's very kindly been answering, and Sophie as well. So that's good. Questions, there are a couple, so let me address those. ICAEW annual fee if not paying SIPFA fee. Oh, fine. Okay, so you want to know what our membership fee is if you're okay. So our standard membership fee is £460 a year, but we do have tiered rates. So don't quote me exactly, but for anyone earning under about £37,000, I believe, it cuts in half to £230. Anyone retired, not working, earning under about £17,000, it drops right down again. Don't quote me exactly, but to about £60 a year for the membership fee. Okay. Resubmission fees, if you fail, half those are the total fee. So 345 divided by 2 is what you pay. Okay, so that is a reduced amount reflective that the examiners are not marking all the answers. Okay, and last question, if you're providing IT audit specialist advice experience, yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a good example. So no issues there, Hill 568. Okay, so on that note, the chat's been disabled. Can't see any of the contents. Maybe we can free that up. Doug, can we get contact details for specific questions? Yeah, if Yoni's put her email in the chat, I hope. Go by Yoni in the first instance. Yeah.
Sorry, Doug, what I'll do, the chat, we can only do it to hosts and panelists, and I do not know how to work Zoom at all. So what I'll do is circulate the documents which Yoni has sent to me. I'll circulate the recording once that's ready, and I'll circulate some email addresses as well. Excellent. So Yoni said she's happy for us to share her email address to everyone, so we can do that. We do have a hand up as well. Radwan, I don't know when you put your hand up, but if you can unmute, if that's okay.
Let's see what's happened there. I can't see that. While that's happening,
it's gone down.
Okay, there was someone saying, would CPD hours be SIPFA or ICAEW levels? That's a very good question, actually. My understanding is that if you're a member of ours, you would, of course, have to satisfy our CPD requirements. Of course, you'll be doing CPD for SIPFA, which would be, it's kind of interchangeable, right? So what you're doing in CPD is interchangeable between the two bodies, but you would still have to meet each of those requirements, okay, in order to be compliant. Okay.
What we've said with CPD,
Oh,
sorry, as well, is that you can use, so CPD for us, you can use for ICAEW and vice versa as well, but you do have to meet the requirements of both bodies.
Brilliant. Okay, good. Okay, I haven't said anything out of turn. Brilliant. Okay, so contact details, yeah, that's fine. Yoni's email will be shared in the first instance, and we can. Okay, listen, everyone. Thanks so much for attending. I'm conscious we want to keep to the hour. Enjoy your evenings. Thanks so much for sticking with us. I hope it's been useful, and we hope we can have many more joint members of our two great institutes. So have a nice evening. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Yoni. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.